there's moments in time where we have to sit back and really reflect and start painting that future, figure out, okay, how far do we go, and are we ready for it, because you can pivot, but you could also risk the balance sheet by your pivot, so you don't
Yeah.
want to do that either. So you have to be able to look at these markets and make very specific determinations of whether or not you can how much it's going to cost to make that risk, how much is that step across going to cost, and then how much are we going to risk. And then there's always that tangible cash risk, but there's also the intangible organizational risk, because if the organization is going to be moving in a vastly, it's like fish going upstream, like it's just not working with the business, and it causes internal issues, then that's another risk that has to be highlighted. So I try to walk through on the Paint the Future course, and to some degree in the book, a very thorough process to help you understand and identify the market, then how to not only understand where the growth opportunity is, but then how to scale it and not risk everything. And it's not, you don't want to throw your dice down the table on your company.
Yeah.
You've got to, it's good to make changes and good to make pivots in businesses, but you have to do it on a very calculated basis.
Yeah.
There are occasions where it is difficult, and sometimes the fastest solution is not going to be the best one, because it requires you to rub against the value. And the moment you rub against the value is mute. No one wants to believe that value actually exists anymore. So you've not just collapsed the one, but your fact that you've collapsed the one also then topples the rest of them. So I found that values and staying the course with values and as a company is absolutely crucial. And there's lots of studies that show that companies that stay to their values have a higher valuation and have more success ultimately. And that's, the numbers support. Not only should we all just want to run for that good, solid moral fabric, but the numbers support that theory as well. Well, I grew up in a small chemical factory town. It was called Sarnia, Ontario. It's just across from Port Huron near Detroit. And I came from a blue collar home, and my father was an electrician and worked in Dow Chemical in the plants. And growing up, there was always a lot of kind of love and camaraderie, support. I would say that though he had a pretty decent job, it wasn't the best location that I grew up in. So I wouldn't say it was on the wrong side of the tracks, but certainly was a very rough background, really rough sort of environment. And so as a young kid, it was always on my mind that I wanted to do great things, which I can tell you a little bit about where that came from. But I was quite determined, to bust out, and I loved management, even though my dad was a union rep, and I sort of saw myself in leadership roles even from a young age.
Where do you think that came from? I mean, were you exposed to any type of entrepreneurial leader, seeing anyone, sort of taking charge? I mean, was there any kind of influence there?
Yeah, absolutely. My grandfather was a huge influence in my life. He was born in Holland in the middle of the First World War, and then grew up of course had a family during the Second World War, and Holland was liberated by Canada at the end of the war, and that was the country he said he wanted to move to. But he was a 40-year-old guy, and he was an entrepreneur. He had his own business, but he sold everything and bought three tickets to Canada. Wow. And took his wife and his youngest child, and two, so it'd be 4 tickets, and off they came over here. And when I got here, or when he got here, there was such a determination to make it in a country they didn't know the language. He struggled, and it was difficult, and it was not an easy road for him. He was a hardworking person, but when I came around, I was kind of, the apple didn't fall that far from that tree, and he really took to me in the sense that I had the same passion for football. He played for the Dutch national team, so he had a lot of sports in him, and so between him and I, we became quite close and the thing that really stuck out for me is that he sacrificed everything for his family, to country to create a platform. And I felt this deep sense of responsibility that I had to actually do something with it. That he, this, despite the fact that he did it so late in age, he didn't have a lot of years to make that type of a difference. But he did it in his own way. He really invested and poured into his kids and wanted to make sure that his kids and his grandchildren had that platform. So I really felt this responsibility that I had to do as much as I could in honor of his legacy. And yeah, he unfortunately passed away with Alzheimer's, but I had a lot of great years there where he really shaped my thinking and really drove me, into me a real, a hard work ethic and drive to be the best I could be.
Yeah. And when he came to immigrated to Canada, did he immediately start his own companies? Or did he, work for someone else, or how did he get into that?
Well, not knowing the language was really tough. So, he
Yeah.
was he owned a paint shop, and he was a painter by trade, and he continued to do that here. Like he started his own business, and then he worked in all those chemical plants in that town that I grew up in. But he always, by the time that he got his language down, and he got his backing, he was well into his 50s and nearing retirement than looking for the next chapter. So that he really turned his attention towards his kids.
Yeah, no, love that. And did you do the whole college thing, or what was your path, kind of
Yeah,
growing up?
so I not having all the resources that I had, I started in the local college and graduated with a technology degree, technology diploma, I guess it would be. But I went off to my first job, and I can tell you the first day I was walking home after after work, and I oddly came in contact with the president of the company walking on the same street, and I remember very frankly the president, and I was mustering up every business question I could even imagine, and asking them all these questions. And at the end of the walk, when we split ways, he just turned to me and said, you can be anything you want to be. You just have to put your mind to it. And that really impacted me. I was actually still on a work term, so I still had to go back and finish up at that time. And it just really affected me, because I thought, this guy is smarter than me, but it's only because of experience and education. But there's no way I can't do what he has done and accomplished, and if I set my mind to it. So that as soon as I was finished that college diploma, I went off to university and got a business degree, and then ultimately an MBA. And I kept working and scratching away and clawing my way up the ladder of business until I hit the C-suite in the mid 90s, and never looked back. It was always just really blessed along the path, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, you had to have been, I guess, showcasing leadership qualities to be able to make your way into the C-suite. But would you say that there's anything that you realized early on, like your ability to be more of the leadership, or be in the leadership role, that sort of stood out, that maybe other people didn't necessarily have? Is there anything that sort of comes to mind?
Certainly the confidence and belief in yourself that you can figure it out, that you can really do anything if you put your mind to it. And I'll give you a quick story of how I ended up in the C-suite. In the mid 90s, I ended up in a company that was just about to file Chapter 11, and it was in the U.S. It was in Michigan, and I was, they were very upfront. They said, we're in a real difficult position. We're gonna have to file, but because we're offering this job, we want you to know the risks that are coming through the door. But for me, it was a great opportunity, because I wanted out of the environmental side, which is where my college diploma was from, and I wanted into management. I wanted into leadership. I wanted to find my way. So I took the job because I was getting into HR, and which for me was, it was kind of almost a sidestep, but in some respects, it was a great step, because one, I took a job in a category that I didn't have a lot of experience in, but it also was in a company that was willing to take a risk on me, and I had to take a risk on them. Oddly, within the first, within the first couple of months, we got the contract ratified because there was a negotiations with the union that I was responsible for. We got that done. Then the company filed Chapter 11, and I was there as part of the, sort of the strategy team developing the human resources and the cuts and the changes and the implementation to help with all the dip financing that was coming in for the restructuring. And over that first 6-7 week period after filing, most of the management team left, and I was the only guy standing around the board table. And this was, the guys from New York flew in, and they were, quite panicky because there's, all the talent was gone around the table. And if we didn't get in and out of Chapter 11 in 18 months, then our number one customer is going to pull the contract, which basically was the end of the business. And they came in and said, Randy, if you can just keep the tires on, and the plan, you were there to help with creating it, just continue to execute it. While I continued to execute it, they replaced everybody around the table but the president, and I became the de facto battlefield president and led the company through a full restructuring and emergence for Chapter 11. So talk about, from, roll up your sleeves and thrown into the deep end. That was a real deep end moment. But I had that opportunity because I was willing to take the risk right at the beginning, and knowing that I could figure it out. I just, I had to be resourceful. I wasn't an expert at everything, so I needed to pull in the resources that I needed to make sure that I didn't blindly look at things and without having the required expertise around me. And I filled in those gaps, and we were able to execute that plan and got in and out in 16 months. And the company went on to be quite successful thereafter. I became successful thereafter too, because that private equity firm that owned the business liked what I did there. And for the next 15 years, I worked for them on a lot of their business issues that they had. They're always in year 6 or 7 with some investment in some company that needed, there's a lot of value that need to be unlocked. And so this began a very long journey for me, where I spent a lot of time helping them with their portfolio companies, get those companies cleaned up. So I moved all over North America, both sides of the border. I lived in the US three times, and came back and forth for them, just helping with their businesses, get that business to get them to liquidity ultimately. But and it required a lot of heavy lifting to get those things done.
Yeah. What are there any commonalities in the companies that they, I guess, invested in that you were sort of parachuted in to help solve different things? Were there any common things that a lot of the companies seem to be doing wrong, or even things that they seem to be doing right?
Well, oddly, I've worked in 9 different sectors over 30 years. So the one thing, though, that was common was that business is, the principles of business transcend industry. Yes, of course, there's always nuances and special things within each sector, but the sort of the theories and the principles of business and leadership transcend all those industries. So they would send me into more manufacturing-based companies for sure. That was certainly the common thread, but they were always in different types of sectors, and in some cases different parts of the world. So whether I worked in Finland, I worked in China and Korea, I worked in 32 different countries over that 30-year period for various periods of time, some not long, so others long. But yes, there certainly is a method sometimes to that madness when you go into a company that's stagnant. I mean, they're not always Chapter 11, but sometimes they're just stagnant. Like, the industry has changed, the situation has changed in the business. Now, how do you take the business that's been fairly successful, all of a sudden hit a flat point, and now how do you get the business back growing again? And so that for me, became part of what, the process and the methodology that, I found myself. There was lots of common themes. That's what led to me writing the book When the Unthinkable Happens, and launching it, because I wanted to take that 30 years, those 10 turnarounds, and bring that process into a methodology that made sense for others to read and be able to follow. So yes, there is a method there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the book, would you say, does it transcend industries as well? Is it more, I guess, a documentation of, your processes, how you can look at different situations? I guess maybe the question is, explain the book and what it's about and what types of things it can help you, achieve or overcome if you're having certain issues. Like what would it help you realize?
Sure. Well, oftentimes, and for me, some of the times that I went into, a situation where, on behalf of the owners, the CEO would remain in place, right? I would come alongside to help the CEO, and in those cases, and as well in my own journey, there's times that you get to in your leadership journey where you end up at a flat point of your own creation. Sometimes it's related to circumstance, family events, sometimes business climate issues, and kid issues, and like there's all kinds of things that can cause a leader's performance to just get off their normal stride. And so in the book, I do talk about how to reach that regain that peak performance, and how to deal with the inside that moves to the outside, that ultimately ends up in the four walls of the business, and how to really improve that leadership performance, and work from the inside out. So there's lots to do in the book, lots to talk about in the book about leadership, but also about how to take your leadership into the workplace, in the sense of making sure the values, the mission, the vision, the purpose, that those things are aligned, and those things change over time. Like once you set them, and it's not like you don't have to ever revisit it.
Yeah.
Different seasons of time and events for a company can actually change the purposes of a company, and so you have to revisit that. You have to sit back and reflect on, where are we in this journey of this business, and where does this business now need to go, and what are sometimes the realities or the situations that the business has now faced that cause the business to pivot. I always think of Nokia. They started off in the rubber tire business, and 115 years later they're doing electronics, and they did everything, washing machines. I think there was all kinds of things that they did, but they had this very nimble ability to start to pivot and change as the business and the seasons of time and the realities of their markets changed. And so we have to have that sort of Nokia-like mentality where every time we face a problem in a business, that's sometimes the world telling us that the business has to change, and that we need to change, and that sometimes the old theories that we've always operated from, or some of the stories that all the older sales guys would tell you about the way it was or the way it is, it's not always the way it's going to be. And so in the book, I talk a lot about how to really reset that vision and the values of the company, and then to take the company forward, how to, my methodology is called LIFT, how to lead with passion, how to inspire your people, how to focus on making lasting change, and how to transform obstacles into opportunities. So the LIFT methodology is really what is the book is all about.
So with that methodology, it sounds like it can help you, identify opportunities that you may not have necessarily seen. So meaning, the company might be struggling in whatever industry it is. And that was going to be one of my questions, is like, how do you identify, we're in this lane, Nokia, we're making tires, and then, all of a sudden we're going to shift over here and we're going to make washing machines or phones or whatever it is. Those are completely different,
Yes.
different product lines, different verticals.
Mhm.
The way that I've always looked at it is like, let's look at some of the resources, some of the things that we do well, some of our assets, and maybe pivot, using some of those assets into a different category or whatever it is. Do you have any type of insights into, I guess, identifying, number one, when you should, change to a different industry, but then also maybe identifying how or what industry to even change into?
Yes, yes. So part of the book will certainly go into that, helping you identify the markets that you need to go into. I have a course actually that's on my website at randydewey.com. It's a course called Paint the Future, and it's a much deeper process than even the book goes into, about how to really identify your core competencies, and how to then assess how many steps away from your core you're able and willing and capable of risking to make a move and a pivot into another industry. So Nokia fell into these other industries not by chance, but sometimes it was by relationship. They had a relationship with someone that needed tires and pulp and paper. Well, all of a sudden, there was an acquisition opportunity that could help serve a common customer. Well, yes, it was a step to the side, but it was only one step away because the customer was the commonality, and the
Yeah.
contract that they won helped them to pivot into another industry, even though it looked like a vastly different industry, which it was, but it wasn't always necessarily that far away because they had one thing that was common, that was the competency with that customer. So sometimes it's customers, sometimes it's products. So sometimes your products can adapt in different spaces and in different industries that you never had, ever thought of. Like Molson Canadian, the beer company here, never thought of making masks and disinfectant, for COVID, but yet they found a way to pivot and use their asset base to actually take that asset and actually use it in a sector that they had never thought about before.
Yeah.
So there's moments in time where we have to sit back and really reflect and start painting that future, figure out, okay, how far do we go, and are we ready for it, because you can pivot, but you could also risk the balance sheet by your pivot, so you don't
Yeah.
want to do that either. So you have to be able to look at these markets and make very specific determinations of whether or not you can how much it's going to cost to make that risk, how much is that step across going to cost, and then how much are we going to risk. And then there's always that tangible cash risk, but there's also the intangible organizational risk, because if the organization is going to be moving in a vastly, it's like fish going upstream, like it's just not working with the business, and it causes internal issues, then that's another risk that has to be highlighted. So I try to walk through on the Paint the Future course, and to some degree in the book, a very thorough process to help you understand and identify the market, then how to not only understand where the growth opportunity is, but then how to scale it and not risk everything. It's not, you don't want to throw your dice down the table on your company.
Yeah.
You've got to, it's good to make changes and good to make pivots in businesses, but you have to do it on a very calculated basis.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned I think a couple of times now, acquiring another company. Any insight onto or into, is it best to try to start your own thing? And again, I guess this is going to be a very, very case by case basis, but in your opinion, starting fresh, starting something new, from scratch, we're entering into a different industry, or acquiring a company who's already in that industry. Any thoughts on which direction would be, perhaps best to go?
Well, acquiring helps you jump down the field faster. There's no doubt. But if your idea, like if you're a technology person and you've come up with a great way to, do sanitization of factories or something in the midst of in an environment where that's really important, then you have a great idea, but you don't have the customers, you don't have the market, you don't have the channel, and you have time that's a little bit not on your side, because the need for that could change. So yes, then an acquisition to buy yourself into the customer channel may be what you need to commercialize your actual idea. Where in some other cases, maybe you're going to be a disruptor of a certain industry. Well, you probably don't want to buy anything in that industry, because you're about to disrupt it, and you're about to actually make some of those companies go away. So in that case, you probably want to be, the venture, go see the venture capitalists, get the angel investors, and get your idea moving forward, and keep everything under the hood as long as you can, until you can get out there and actually make that impact. So it really is situational based, but I'm a firm believer in the organic strategy, and I'm also a firm believer in the inorganic strategy. It really is dependent upon the direction that the core idea is coming from, and what would actually help that core idea get commercialized, because it's tough. Even if you have a great idea, sometimes they don't get commercialized, right? And it costs a lot more and takes a lot longer than most people think. So there is a risk to doing it the slow and steady way, but there is merit in it for sure, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah, and you also mentioned, the core values and that. Um, in your experience, when you were brought into these other companies, obviously you said you were working alongside with the CEO and that, and normally those types of people, they have a very, very strong personality, we'll say, and were you ever in a situation where you felt like, the CEO felt maybe like he's being watched or threatened by, your presence in that process? I'm curious, obviously building a company, growing a company is, a lot of times it revolves around the people that you bring together, and obviously a way to be able to bring those people together are by establishing your core values and attracting some people with similar thought process and all of that, by being placed into different situations. Obviously it's not necessarily your core values potentially that you're stepping into. um, any thoughts on, I guess, uh, as a CEO, establishing your core values, then projecting those core values onto other people in a way that is conducive to the business moving forward, rather than sort of strangling it, and it has to be this way, or it has to be very, very regimented. And I know that was kind of like a long, broad question, but does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I know where you're taking the question for sure, and what's at the heart of your question. And I never found it hard to get to agreement on what the values ought to be.
Mhm.
Where the problem was is in the application of the values, and that's where things start to come apart. So in cases where I came in to replace the CEO, which was less optimal, I loved it when I came in beside the CEO, because
Mhm.
typically, it's like any situation where you got a player that's injured on the field, like, and it's the captain, like, you don't just say, okay, throw him out and we're getting another player to put in there. It usually is more costly to the whole dynamic, right? I
Yeah.
liked when we come around, and even a CEO, and you support him, you throw resources, you help, you enable, and you get the CEO back on his feet, and whatever reason he's out of stride, let's help him get back in stride. And I always found that was the cheaper, more effective, and faster way of actually getting the company repaired. So I liked those mandates, even though my values aren't ones that maybe will be written on the wall. I'm going to probably not likely have any problems with the values as
Yeah.
the management team and the CEO come to decide what they are. It's in the application of the values, and that's where you end up with with contention, because the way I would apply a value versus the way you would apply a value is going sometimes going to be different. There's always ways where we can argue in the gray ourselves out of the application, and sometimes it's harder to stay on the high road when you go through challenging ethical dilemmas as a company. And I'm a bit black and white when it comes to that. We've always got to err on the side of caution, because there's a greater risk at play. The whole organization is going to be watching that application, and it sometimes will cost you. It costs you a contract. It may cost you a lost opportunity of some sort, but the return on taking a stance for the ethics in a business pays back in dividends big time. And I talk about that in the book quite a bit. I give a number of stories of situations I faced where I had to turn back and say, okay, I know you used to give that procurement manager these things, but we're not doing that anymore. Our whole organization just rubs against us when we have to buy that item or pay for that trip. I don't care if that was the way our competitors are doing it, and I don't care if that's the way the procurement manager expects. We're not going to do that because it rubs against our core values, and we're not going to operate against our values. And sometimes taking stances like that, I talked about that story in the book where we lost 25% of our revenue, but I won't steal the story. But we stood our ground, and we won in the end, and we won big time. So there are occasions where it is difficult, and sometimes the fastest solution is not going to be the best one, because it requires you to rub against the value. And the moment you rub against the value is mute. No one wants to believe that value actually exists anymore. So you've not just collapsed the one, but your fact that you've collapsed the one also then topples the rest of them. So I found that values and staying the course with values and as a company is absolutely crucial. And there's lots of studies that show that companies that stay to their values have a higher valuation and have more success ultimately. And that's the numbers support. Not only should we all just want to run for that good solid moral fabric, but the numbers support that theory as well.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I mean, it basically gets everybody rowing in the same direction.
Mhm.
Everyone's working toward the same thing, and everyone, is collaborating and understanding, how things are done. One thing that and actually I learned this from another podcast that I was doing. Um, Do you have any insights into, when you're creating your core values, um, how do you go about, establishing, what those core values are? So I guess let me explain a little bit where I went with this. We basically had a list of words, we'll say, which is, very, very common. And, then there's a description of the words underneath it. What we found was that it was very difficult for people to remember them, just a list of words. But as soon as we made them more action based, like, so our first core value is significance. So we want everyone in our organization and all of our customers to feel significance in every interaction, right? So significance was, the first core value, but we changed that to provide significance.
Yes.
And then, basically the same thing. So we're making it more action based. And then, everyone is like, oh, this is the first one. This is the third one. This is, it sort of stuck a little bit better. And I'm just curious if you have any insights or any thoughts on that
Yeah,
approach.
absolutely. And I give a whole step-by-step process in my book of how to do it. But I'll shortchange some of that. In my view, the leadership team has to really own it, and it has to be in words that are not fancy and not nicely combed, but words that have meaning behind it. So I remember when I ran a value session with my management team on a company I had taken over, they were so caught up with some of the past behaviors that they felt, it was the same behaviors that I was mentioning earlier, where they were just caught up and say, look, I don't want to cheat my way. We need to take the high road. And they were and all of the things were about integrity and values and taking the high road. And as we were working through the session, the one guy said, I don't want to cheat. Winners never cheat. And as soon as he said that, winners never cheat, man, it stuck. The whole room, yeah, that's exactly it. Winners never cheat. And I don't want to be a cheater. And when you think about winners never cheat, it's kind of a negative phrase, but boy, did it resonate. And nobody forgot that. No one forgot that. And so that became the number one value of the company. And, everybody in the company jumped on that too, because they knew the history of the company. There was a lot of cheating going on. And so there was just a gravity. It just was really a hook that caused a lot of people to want to rally around. And so I think that that's the best values that you can write, are the values that have the most meaning to everybody and really imbue a sense of passion, a sense of inspiration that people really want to rally around, and they hold each other accountable for, because ultimately that's what the values are for. We got to, iron sharpens iron. We got to be able to make sure that we're growing together. And when I'm doing something that, to you looks like I'm in breach of that value, I want you to call me out. And so when that value has that kind of life, then you're gonna see good things come as a result of that.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that analogy to it, because we did the exact same thing. And one of the other ones that stands out in my mind, our old value was what the heck was it now? Collaboration, right? So just single word. We changed that to, I'm honored to push your broom. So because so many people were, oh, well, that's not my job. That's not my job. And we were like, there's no more of that. If someone needs help, everybody needs to be willing to step in and help. So, yeah, I love, that story that you just told, like, when fire sort of erupts through the room and like you hit on a target or a hot spot, and people are like, yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly the way we feel, so really, really cool. I love being in situations like that. So what else in your history of, all these different companies and different experiences, are there any other commonalities that stand out that you feel maybe people were doing good, or people were doing the right way, or things that seem to be in the successful companies, seem to be found, one company after the other? Anything come to mind as far as the successful things that people were doing?
Sure. I got introduced to Vern Harnish's work back in the late 90s and early 2000s in his Rockefeller Habits. And
Yeah.
And that was in one of the companies that I went into. It was a young engineer that, had the book and was looking at, those successful habits. And I grabbed the copy of the book and I started reading it. And what really resonated for me was just the structure, right? The process that you would follow, and having that methodology and the step-by-step methodology. Vern kind of just, he targets a couple of areas, but it's not necessarily a fulsome system. But what I took away from that, and as we applied it, and then I went through a lot of the Six Sigma and the black, I got my master black belt, and bringing those disciplines into my into my process really gave me a lot of material, a lot of things to help realize that all these pillars, the pillar of people, the pillar of operations and sales and finance in a company, underlying the cash flow and the strategy underneath those, as they call it the four pillars and the foundation of any business. There's methodologies to be able to improve on those pillars and solidify the foundation of a company. And that's what I created in the methodology. And I realized over time, after all those turnarounds, that, I'm repeating a lot of the approach, but it's just different inputs, right? Different factors, different situations. But as I started to refine my approach, and it really became, it started really crystallized. And I want to draw back to Vern as being the sort of the founder of that thought in my mind, that there's a method in here, and you need to follow a process in a discipline to help you actually improve it. So I give him certainly lots of credit in my evolution here as a leader, that bringing discipline and process to bear on these things. I certainly decided to expand that out to the fulsome elements of all of the pillars of the business. So I'm quite excited about having completed that work and all the other stuff I've been developing and in the form of courses and the methodology here for sure at Lift Leadership.
Yeah, love it, love it. So what's next for you? What's on the list of goals that you're looking to achieve with the book, with the courses? What's next for you?
Well, certainly, I'm not the replacement guy anymore. I want to come alongside, and I've made a real determination that, when I look at the statistics and my experiences, don't fire your CEO. The cost of that decision is major for a company. It sets the organization back. The loyalty and the allegiance within the organization, even though it may be a little frayed because the CEO has been having trouble, but the cost of that termination is massive in a direct and an indirect manner. And there's a better way, as I said earlier, if the coach or the captain of the team is, falls to injury, do we just, sweep them away and say, hey, look, thanks a lot and see you later, or the next captain's coming through the door? No, we actually invest in that person to actually enable them. And so my whole mission is turned into the investment in the CEOs and founders in the C-suite, and helping them to be successful, and bringing the methodologies and the processes that have worked for me over the years to the table, and to help them through that to be able to get to success and get to triumph.
Yeah, no, I love it. And any specific industry or anything that you're focused on, or does it not really matter?
Well, like I said, I was in 9 different sectors, and the only one that didn't have a manufacturing base to it was banking. I ran a bank, and just before Lehman Brothers collapsed, and the notorious financial crisis, which is actually what the title of the book's about. When the unthinkable happens, as when I ran that bank in the middle of the financial crisis. But anyways, other than that, manufacturing was always a bit of the theme of my background across those 9 sectors. So that would certainly probably a gravity point for me, is to go to helping companies that are making stuff as well.
Yeah, no, I love it. Randy, this has been fantastic. If people want to learn more about you, your services, the books, courses, what would be the best way to reach out and get in touch?
randydewey.com. So quite easy to find, and it was a unique enough name. I was able to grab the URL. So yeah, a couple of years, or 8 years ago now, but yeah, so randydewey.com is the best way to get me. You can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and all those places. I'm quite easy to find nowadays. So, but yeah, and you can certainly grab a copy of my book off Amazon. But yeah, absolutely. Those are probably the easiest ways to get me.
Beautiful. I love it. Randy, thanks for the time, and thanks for spreading a little bit of your secret sauce, turning around all these companies over the years. So this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Super. Thank you for having me today.